Hey everyone, it's Marshall. Before we get started today, 2 housekeeping things. The first is that I'll be in Miami next week for Miami Tech Week. Come say hi, give us feedback on the show, let me know what kind of episodes we should cover more this year. DM me on Twitter if you're around. I'm at MA Kozloff, K-O-S-L-O-F-F. Second note is that we're taking a brief springtime production break this week. We'll still have a new episode out for you this Monday, April 18th, but there will not be a new episode on Tuesday, the 21st. We'll be back to our regular programming schedule on Monday, April 25th. All right, that's it. Now to the episode. Welcome to the Deep End by On Deck, a podcast for visionary builders, creators, and thinkers to discuss world-changing stories and ideas. I'm your host, Marshall Kozloff.
The typical founder will not wake up. Like even me, I have a few exec coaching clients, and you can feel that they're pulled to serving individuals while the economics of their business draws them towards serving businesses. I think it's a dichotomy, or I think it's a conflict that lots of founders internally feel. I started the business for this reason, trying to do A, but seems like only B will work. It's a tough thing that I think a lot of people deal with.
On Deck is where ambitious people worldwide go to start companies, find their next roles, and invest in their careers. The Deep End invites the founders, operators, and investors from the On Deck community and beyond to turn their experiences into the ideas others need to start their own founder odysseys. Joining me in the Deep End this week is Julien Smith, co-founder and CEO at Practice, best-selling author and executive coach. Today's discussion focuses on Julien's journey from starting as an online author and creator to eventually becoming a multi-time startup founder instead of the vice versa, which tends to be the typical way to do it. We discuss what it takes to make the leap from talking about something to actually doing it, how publishing has changed and how it remains the same, the evolution and trajectory of the executive coaching industry from Tony Robbins era to today, and how to avoid the pressures from shifting from small business clients to enterprise clients over time. Julien has a fascinating and unusual perspective on being a founder, the startup industry, and tech, given his unique trajectory from content creator to builder. Our discussion also touches on some interesting ground around the growth of executive coaching and self-improvement as they've become more mainstream over time, and how founders can learn from each other directly in peer-to-peer networks more than ever before. So without further ado, let's dive into the episode. Julien Smith, welcome to the Deep End.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm going to start by asking you a question, Julien, that relates to your prior life as an author before you were actually a startup founder. Are you making things happen, or are you just making noise when it comes to your company, this podcast, all these different bits? Okay, so can you explain my joke and give a bit about your background there?
I had a subtitle for a book that was called, "Are you making things happen, or are you just making noise?" I hope the answer is I'm making things happen, but I think what that means to me is I feel like I'm out there helping people, right? Like I didn't need to start another company, let's say, right? But one of the reasons that I want to do it, and we could talk about this sort of like along the line, but like, is because I felt it was a really venture is like a super effective way to get smart people together and to do good, like, and to help people, right? And so hopefully that means I'm making things happen. But there is a lot of noise out there for sure.
Yeah, so obviously we're going to talk about Practice, but I actually am really interested in your background. So I kind of want to start there, and then we'll jump around a couple places. But I'd love to know about your journey as an author and how that actually led you into the startup space and like what you did or didn't learn, because it's interesting. I'm sure you know the creator economy. I don't want to say fad, but definitely like it's cool. Sure. To create, to write, to podcast, to do videos. Mm-hmm. A lot of founders and VCs are doing this after the fact, but you actually did it for real. Like portfolio is a real I podcast, so I'm just the deep end. Like you have a real publisher. Like
I do.
You get this reference, but sometimes it's like, oh, this weird publisher in some corner of upstate New York. Like Portfolio is a real publisher.
They are.
You made the New York Times bestseller list, so I've credentialed you enough. So talk about your journey in that part there.
Well, so my father was a career and a executive coach, and so I was never taught like what to do in life, like for a living. And I wasn't even clear that, solopreneurship, what we call solopreneurship at my company today, because we serve coaches, is really entrepreneurship in a strict sense. So I actually didn't really have any entrepreneurs around me, and I didn't have a model for like what to go out there and do. But I read books and I respected the written word a lot. And to me, when I was given the opportunity, it was the early days of the social web, like Twitter had just happened. And we had written some ebooks, me and a co-author of mine, Chris Brogan. And these ebooks were becoming popular, and a real publisher, had gotten their hands on it. And they were like, this should be a book. And we had an online audience, as they tell all the creators in 2022, right, to do. Build an audience and get your channels together or whatever. So we'd done this in 2000, I want to say 7 or 8. And we had blogs that were widely read. And so obviously a book like that blasts into the public eye, and it became a bestseller pretty much immediately. I'm not saying that that's a given. It was good timing. It was like a shitty week probably, where all the books before that were just like not that great. Like Deadpool, right? It was like the best. It was like the number 1 movie that week in October or whatever. And so maybe a similar thing. And so that was my world. I was in tech, but I was really tech adjacent. And so a lot of my work, when you're a publisher, when you're an author, you don't really make money on books that much, even if you get a decent advance or something. What you really make money off of is speaking gigs in a lot of cases. And so if you can manage to get speaking gigs at all, then you're going to make a decent living doing that. But that meant that I was over and over again explaining the 101 of tech again and again and again, and often in a really rote way with the same slides, like every single time, right? And so I would hope I wasn't a 101 person, that I really was at least a 201 level understanding or a 301 level understanding person. In terms of how tech worked and why some companies worked and how technology evolves. I had a lot of Kevin Kelly in my thinking, and that he has a book called What Technology Wants that had a big influence on me. And then by the third book, I still had some ideas, but I had an idea for a company, Breather, and I increasingly was having. I had people around me that had maybe raised a little bit of money, and I was like advisor to a few tiny startups. And I was like, I really feel like I could do this. And this is this gap where I don't know. Most people, exactly like you're saying, first they go out and they become an entrepreneur, they go build something, and then they talk about it. And in my case, because of the way that social web was happening and rando people became experts and had audiences, from one day to the next, I went from I have a podcast and a blog to I'm a New York Times bestselling author, which is a really unusual path. But it meant that it wasn't clear to me whether I would succeed as an entrepreneur because I had never really done it. Someone just handed me the keys and said, yeah, here's some write some books and go sell some copies. And I'd been able to do that. So there's this great fear in me of I'm pretty good at talking. Let's see if I'm good at doing, which I didn't know. If I wasn't clear on at all. But my second book, Flinch, which is even today a book that especially tech entrepreneurs, turns out a lot of them were influenced by that book. The book is about why people don't do the things that they claim to want to do, and how to sort of fill that gap, and why.
That's a great topic.
Why? Yeah. And so I had almost like called myself out beforehand, and by saying, if you don't do the thing that you want to do, then you're effectively you are the person that you wrote about. And like you're a phony. And so I said, well, I guess I'm starting a company then And due to a bunch of things, I was able to be successful to a degree as a founder. Like millions of people use Breather, and it raised $150 million while I was CEO, and we got to 250 people in 10 cities, and like it influenced a lot of people. This company, that's how that shift happened. And all of a sudden, I was a startup founder. Now I've started a few companies, but it was really the center of it was, well, let's start projects. And I've just been one of those people that just fundamentally starts projects and sees how they go more than anything.
Yeah. I mean, there's a million things I want to pick up on. First, it's interesting that you became an author during the early social web, because at that time, and once again, I've only read about this because I was in high school at the time and not engaged in the space, but before, it's kind of funny to read books from 2008, like after the fact.
Right.
For a lot of folks, there was a lot of promise, and it seems as if stories like yours would have been a little more common than ended up actually happening relative to like people who are writing things, people who are discovering things.
Yeah.
And, we had Sahil on, because he actually published a book through Portfolio from Gumroad back in November. And he was talking about the publishing industry and how he was kind of shocked that it had not changed that much relative to the time that you went through it. So once again, same publisher, but the process isn't even that great still. Just what are your thoughts on like how that industry evolved after you basically seemingly left?
Well, I just really believe that things happen only when under extreme duress, So like there's no reason for publishing in a lot of cases to change, and the same way that and so we're recording this in April of 2022 when like people at least where I am in Canada are just starting to go back to the movies. And so you can see how desperate the film industry is to get people back to the movies so that they don't have to reinvent their entire industry. They're like, please, God, let me not have to change this. And
we'll give them Morbius and they'll be happy.
Yeah. Well, Morbius did not help. That's true. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe you think, but no. So with the way that publishing, and actually you see this really everywhere, is like things are trying to change as little as possible, which is why a successful company is probably not 50% different than what's currently out there, or even 25% different. It's probably like 5 to 10% different than what was there before. And if it is vastly deviating, well, the world is going to pull it back, right? The same way that now taxis in Manhattan are inside of the Uber app finally. And so fundamentally, everything's coming back to like, and it takes like 100 million, it takes like $1 billion, $10 billion for something to be 5% different than what it was before, because the forces that want the world to remain the same are extremely rich. And publishing is not an exception to that. Publishing very much is like, let's try and keep this train going as much as possible. And they're not entrepreneurs in a lot of cases. There's a French expression. I just came back from France. It was one of my first trips I have done in a long time. And in French, they have an expression, la première génération est un aigle, la seconde génération est un faucon, and la troisième génération en est un vrai, which means the first generation is amazing. It's a pun. It's like a play on words. The second generation is like kind of
I don't speak French, but it kind of rhymes.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, the French people are like, oh my God. And then the third generation are fucking idiots. And so anyone that's like inheriting something, inheriting strictly speaking dollars, but just generally speaking, who hasn't built it, doesn't have that sense of like, fuck it, let's blow it up. The way that you see entrepreneurs have that. Not a lot of people have that DNA, and it's good because the world can't be constantly reinvented all the time. But for those people who do have it, it's disproportionately affects society, let's say, right? But the world, by and large, doesn't want that to happen.
So let's get to Practice, your current company. In terms of your biography, you said your father was an executive coach, and Practice enables coaching businesses. And I know nothing about executive coaching nor coaching businesses today. So let's just start with the most obvious part. How does the world of coaching look different today than it did for your father?
Yeah, hey, that's a great question. So in the 80s is my father became a coach like in probably 1980 or something like that. So this is the very beginning of Tony Robbins. We were lucky to get Tony Robbins as an investor in our thing during the last round that we just did with Andreessen Horowitz. So it's like this world is really a couple of generations old, right? And so to be a second generation exec coach, maybe to a degree, because I do it a few hours a week, gives you this amazing perspective into founders and what the world is like when you're not actually in the driver's seat as an entrepreneur, and you're more like guiding others. So I will say that probably some of the major things are still the same, but the acceptance, and this is the reason why, like, Brianne Kimmel yesterday on Twitter does this thing where she goes, hey, who are the founders who have become executive coaches? And she just asked for a bunch of responses. So close to 100 responses come in from ex-founders who have become executive coaches, part-time or full-time. I consider myself more of a founder CEO than an exec coach, but I'm part of that little group there. And effectively, it has normalized itself. Out there, especially in the startup world, there's an enormous amount of support ecosystem to support founders. So that's on the founder level. There used to be nothing for that at all. And so, I was talking to one of the top exec coaches in Silicon Valley about this recently. He was like, your father was a coach. I didn't know anybody whose father was a coach. Like that's an extremely rare thing, because it was such an unacceptable sort of idea that you would get help from others or something. So I think, like therapy, like a bunch of variations on that, we're coming into a world where coaching, and actually like TikTok and like other things like that, are really helping this happen, because anyone can just decide that they put up their shingle and decide that they are one, which has some good and some bad. But certainly from an acceptance standpoint, I think that the learning is happening from a peer-to-peer level rather than before, which is like here's how learning used to happen with startups. It would be like me, the founder that doesn't know anything, medium post, and then down again to the author. Whereas now the transmission is happening more directly from one founder to another, let's say. And you can call that coaching or you can call it teaching or whatever, but it's much more common than it was.
So you made reference to Tony Robbins. So aside from him being a part of your latest round, can you just, because you rooted his experience in the 80s as tied to your father's. So talk about Tony. It's kind of funny. There was a period. I'm just thinking out loud here, but there's kind of a period in the early 2000s, like early aughts, where Tony would just be in movies. So he was in Shallow Hal. There's just always like Tony Robbins, but I just haven't thought of Tony Robbins. Yeah. Just give us like the full, even for the audience too, especially younger people, the thought.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say, so what happened is that this is probably the first figure who was ever in the mainstream saying you can do it, which is kind of a weird thing to think about culturally, because it's such a big deal now. And personal development and self-help is actually such a big part of the culture that you can be on Instagram, have whole Instagram accounts. You can make your whole timeline into you can do it posts.
Yes.
But the reality is that actually began as a cultural phenomenon around in the 70s and 80s, and Tony Robbins was an element of that. And so, but I will say, from the interactions, not huge interactions that I've had in that sphere, is like, it's kind of amazing that he's still going, and it's kind of amazing that there are people, and there's some dedication to helping people that I think is super fascinating in that space. There is money to be made in executive coaching, especially with startups. Like, just speaking as an idea, we actually just published a post about what happens and what the economics of that look like on our website. But what is really interesting about it is, beyond money, with people like Tony, like they just keep going, and they're just like, there's more people to work with, and there's more, and it's one of the reasons that we really do what we do, is because we love helping helpers. And that's really like the credo, so to speak, at Practice, is being able to help people that effectively have no support and that want to run a business kind of on their own and don't have the ecosystem around them to support them.
Yeah, that's the perfect pivot. Introduce Practice and just what it actually means in the context of this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for us, what we do is we want to build tools for solopreneurs so that I would say the number one reason that we exist is because you have a set of tools out there that turn out, maybe they start like Dropbox, and they start serving like a single person like you or me. And it's like, oh my God, file sharing. And it's so exciting. But fundamentally, all of those companies just like end up going enterprise. That's what inevitably what happens, right? Where the majority of revenue will happen through serving Fortune 500s or something like that. Even my last company, Breather, started serving psychotherapists, serving people who were businesses of one. And the pull of enterprise and of giant companies just like keeps happening over and over again. So it means that there's a bunch of these little tools out there, right? But all of those little,
could you explain what you mean by going enterprise?
Oh, yeah, what I mean by enterprise. Yeah. So what I mean is from a startup standpoint is companies that serve small businesses or companies that serve big businesses. And what I mean is that in startups is this sort of general phenomenon that happens, which is almost everyone goes up market, starting to serve individuals, and then inevitably there's some pivot to bigger businesses. And this inevitably happens because bigger businesses are lower churn, and the economics are bigger, and the ticket price is bigger. And so almost everyone who's a founder can knows about this experience and has to figure out this shift of, okay, are we serving bigger businesses or are we serving smaller businesses? The economics lean heavily in the direction of bigger businesses because the ticket price is big. You could put salespeople on them, et cetera. But back to sort of the whole point of what I mean here is like when there's 5 or 6 or 10 different tools that individuals use, but all of those companies really don't give a shit about them, you end up with a suite of tools that are sort of poorly serving that single person. There's one exception to a company like this, and it's Shopify, where even though they do have a bigger business kind of section, it's called Shopify Plus, actually the majority of their revenue still comes from small businesses, and they continue to lean in that direction. And so from the perspective of our mission at Practice, we want to do the same thing for service businesses and solopreneurs. Instead of this drag up market that inevitably happens, it's like serve that business of one and serve them really well. And you know, we happened to talk earlier about how my father was an exec coach and why we serve coaches. So it makes it easy for me to do that spiritually, like in terms of the emotional reasoning behind it. But we built up a team of people that effectively really, really like and get a lot of satisfaction from serving individuals rather than businesses as a culture.
You know, that's really interesting, the Shopify example, because once again, the way you told the story of enterprise, it's not as if most founders wake up, especially when an idea is nascent, and think, I am just so pumped to just serve that big enterprise client.
Yeah.
Like once I get that like mid-size hospital chain in Chicago, I'm just no, like it probably actually starts the way you're telling it. So why is it that you think Shopify was able to maybe resist that to their benefit? And how does that reality maybe inform or not inform how you're approaching practice?
That's a great, so they're just down the street from me, so to speak, in Canada, right? Like they're one town over. And so I think that to do it, you have to make the economics work, and you have to find a way to help your customers become successful versus relying on the success of your customer. So Slack relies, and I'm this is so reductionist, this conversation, right? But like if you follow me, like Slack relies on the success of its customer to increase the number of seats that it serves and ultimately to make a customer into something meaningful for their business. Shopify really needs to work super hard at making their businesses successful, because the reality is most businesses that are started, most SMBs that are started fail. And they utterly die, which obviously reduces the amount that this business is gonna pay Shopify. So the same thing is true for us. We have to spend a ton of time educating people on how to get their first client, how to make contracts work, like the real fundamentals of business. But actually, it's incredibly motivating to do that. You're right that it is the typical founder will not wake up. Like even me, I have a few exec coaching clients. And you can feel that they're pulled to serving individuals, while the economics of their business draws them towards serving businesses. And so I think it's a dichotomy, or I think it's a conflict that lots of founders internally feel. I started the business for this reason, trying to do A, but seems like only B will work. It's a tough thing that I think a lot of people deal with.
So speak a little bit about your customers then. Like, we're talking about coaches, but also you're obviously speaking about solopreneurs. Like, that's very, very broad. So help us understand your market.
Yeah, we really think about this is why we talk specifically about coaches, and we serve specifically coaches. The first thing is like, I don't think that the average founder would have been able to raise 10 million for Andreessen to serve what is viewed as a small market like this, right? So for us, it's really like a path to serving a single type of customer extremely well, and then broadening that to, let's say, therapists, and then broadening that to another type of solopreneur, right? We call them businesses of one, these people. And often they're combining a set of they have a bunch of side hustles all at once. So they might be an event planner / a coach / sometimes they are a consultant on A, B, and C thing. But they're effectively trying to cobble together a bunch of, and by the way, it's a gigantic, this segment of American and Canadian and Western society is expanding massively as people are trying to cobble together a set of incomes that work for them without the sacrifices of having to work for a single employer. It's especially true once they realize, oh, I can actually separate myself like geographically from where I work. Because of COVID, that frees up all this stuff. Now all of a sudden they're like, oh, I can actually work from anywhere. Oh, wait, maybe I can do these 3-4 things and make this all work together. Coaching is an increasing part of the people, the sort of the slice of the pie to make that work. And so what's fascinating about this space is it's really direct peer-to-peer learning that is happening. And often it's people that you wouldn't think of as being, let's say, when you think of a coach, you definitely don't think of like an 18-year-old influencer, but there's a segment of society, there's a segment of coaches that are those people, and we serve them, and we serve them in the same way that we would serve like a 60-year-old ex-CEO, in actually like a super non-judgmental way. We really think about it as not like, are you certified to be coaches? Because there are groups that feel that they can certify whether someone is a coach or not, or allowed to do so. Our perspective is like, we want people to teach, and we want people to transmit and to be able to help others. And we just sort of become like a set of tools to be able to do that.
And I'd love you just to teach us a little bit more about the coaching industry, because as you explicitly and kind of implied a bit, people think of it as a small industry.
Yeah.
What is the industry? It's not one that I think most people are just going to think of off the top of their heads.
Mm-hmm. In fact, most people probably don't know a single, we know hundreds of them, obviously, by this point, but most people do not know a single one. And almost everyone that is, and an increasing amount of people do look for them, but they have to go through word of mouth, and they literally don't know where to go and to find a coach, right? And so I will say that from a solopreneurship standpoint, it actually is one of the fastest growing industries in America at the moment, from the perspective of the number of coaches that are being created and the amount of money that's being spent on it. And that's happening inside of giant companies, just like it's happening with single individuals. And I think that what's fascinating to me, at least, about this space is when I meet coaches that have these incredible, they tend to be more successful as they have these like incredibly narrow niches. So examples to me that I've seen are like people that serve only deaf or hard of hearing people, which is like a customer that we just happened to get last month, or an ex-lawyer whose job it is to coach other people on how to convince juries. And that's literally his only niche that he has. And so you have these segments where it's like, hey, it's really important to do this, and there's no one to teach me how to do it. And back to the whole point about, we were talking about like Medium and blog posts before, that was like the way that people learned how to build a company, and there was no direct ability to do direct transmission. And so I think that one of the things that's really interesting about it is because it's becoming more open and it's growing and it's becoming more acceptable to have one, it is accelerating the learning of a lot of people who would end up making a lot of mistakes. And this is exceptionally true in startups. If you're a first-time startup founder, you know that there's a lot of stuff that you simply just have no clue about, right? And so it's fascinating to have that direct transmission from founder to founder and saying, don't screw this up the way I screwed this up at my company. Do this exactly as I'm saying, or do it close to what I'm saying, and you'll save yourself like a year of your life, or you'll cause your company to be successful instead of fail. It's amazing that this is happening for the first time, and it's amazing that in a way, like, VCs are basically funding it, right?
Yeah, and something I'd like to learn more about. Why didn't you frame this as a creator economy startup last year?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so because I don't. It's
an easy. There'd be an easy story to tell.
Yeah.
You've written, like I said, like you actually were a creator first. During a very nascent part of the social web. Creators, I say this as one myself, have a bunch of problems that are similar, or not even problems, challenges that are similar to the coach solopreneur one. So yeah, why didn't you frame it that way?
I think the majority of coaches are actually not content creators is the first reason. And we knew that this market existed. Market is a kind of like economic way of thinking about it. We knew these people existed, and we knew they were underserved. If you go out there and you look at the software that is serving coaches, it's mostly like teams of one, individual like people who are just writing code as fast as they can to serve some, like a group. But never has a venture-backed company been able to apply the economics of venture into this and say, you know what, let's actually like put 10 engineers on this and really make it work. And that's actually like it's super empowering to be able to say, oh, wow, it's like literally this market that's literally just sitting here. But it would be difficult, I think, for, as I said, for like any random founder to be able to do that with a meaningful amount of capital from the get-go. I think the reason for me is that I see a lot of coaches out there for whom, like, they don't even have a public presence. You don't know what their names are. Like, they don't have a lot of Twitter followers. They're simply out there just in the back doing their work, and the majority of their customers come by referral and not by like social media like following. And so I don't know, like I really think about serving customers rather than how to pitch a company. And obviously it's turned out anyway, like we were able to raise money and we were able to do those things. It's worked out well. But to me, I think it's probably closer to the experience of the coach to talk about it as coaching rather than creating economy. Although I have to say, like, it's very fad driven, and creator economy companies. I've talked about this with that Andrew Chen. Do get a disproportionate amount of attention for sure.
Yeah, and that's basically what I was implying with that question. Something I'd like to learn more about is just who are coaches? And I don't mean on a literal personal level. I mean, so for example, to your point, I didn't actually encounter my first coach in the tech space until like after COVID. And this person I know just tweeted how he was doing in-person meetups, walking around the park in New York once the lockdowns ended. And my first thought was like, oh, interesting. Like people do that. Like, it kind of makes more sense to have like an executive coach in the sense of like, so for example, your father makes a lot of sense to me. Like, okay, there's this big company, there's all these different bits, but this was the person who's working with founders. So just talk about coaching. Like, who are coaches? How do you become a coach? There's no credentialing. Gatekeeping institution, obviously.
Yeah, so there's a few of them. The ICF is the main one, so they're like, if you're looking for a governing body, what happens is often people do it as a second calling. It's almost never their first job, and so that's the first thing to discover is like you have to go out there and get experience, right? And you have to go out there and get experience, is I guess the way people feel about it. And then now they're like, you know what, though? I really discovered that teaching or coaching is my calling, is what you often hear. And it's because they had a personal experience of their own. And they're like, you know what, actually, I really like doing this and I like serving people. And then they fall a lot of the ways into the background. Their customers last a super, super, super long time. And they'll do it on a weekly, bi-weekly, or on a monthly basis or something like that. And then these customers last forever, and it happens by word of mouth, and they have giant waiting lists, and it's really difficult to get a slot with them. And that's true for a lot of coaches as high up as Silicon Valley, and as serving the top Silicon Valley companies, but it's true all the way down to like these invisible people that are just out there doing the work. So I would say that a similar thing happens like probably with like chiropractors, and probably happens with physical therapists, where the common thing that happens to them, unless they learned it from school, is I fucked up my back and I was desperate. I couldn't get out of bed and I was screwed and I didn't know where to turn. And I met this guy. And then I met this guy and he said, I'm not going to give up on you and I'm going to help you take care of this and we're going to get you back to doing whatever, dancing with your wife or whatever. And then what happens to this person is they're so deeply influenced by, and this is getting like kind of a little woo-woo, but by this healing, right? And then the result of that is they're like, man, there's probably a lot of people suffering like me out there, and I was suffering so much. I bet I could help people like this too. So that's the path that happens. And that's the same path that happened to my father, and the same path that happens to a lot of coaches that we serve, right? And that happens with regards to Silicon Valley founders that turn into exec coaches. In the case of those people that are doing that out there in Silicon Valley or with venture founders these days, it's people that have typically started one or two companies. They have been able to raise, I don't know, in my case, it's unusual, but I'm primarily a founder. They've raised some amount of money. They've been able to get their company, hopefully, to product market fit. And they're just like, I don't want to do that anymore, but I do want to help people so that they don't have to go through the things that I did. It's a similar mindset and it's a similar experience. And what I think is happening increasingly is people are just realizing that this is an acceptable path for them to do. And so out there on Twitter, out there in the tech world, you'll see an increasing amount of them that'll just be like, yeah, I was a founder. Like Chad Dickerson is a really good example of this, who was the CEO of Etsy while Etsy was going public. And then afterwards, he became a full-time executive coach. And you've never heard from him since then, right? He's not out there like trying to promote his thing. What he does just works. And so there's just a lot of people out there like this. And for the record, if you are a founder and you're listening to this, and you don't have one, you should go out and find one, especially if you're venture-backed, because basically it's going to cause your investors to be happier because you're more likely to succeed, and you won't be as fucking isolated, right? And so I think there's probably a world in the next 5 years where probably it becomes a needed part of the support system of the founder to have a CEO coach that has done it before on the side, so that they have someone that they can sort of like not be as isolated while they're building their business.
Yeah, a couple specific questions then. So one, what is the difference between teaching and coaching then?
The answer that the official coaching bodies would say is that they would tell you, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people, I'll give you my answer after I give the governing bodies answers. The governing bodies would say it is question related and it's inquiry based. And so rather than a mentorship, which is what I just talked about with CEO, from CEO to CEO, which is like, whoa, hold on. Okay, hold on. Your marketing thing is completely fucked up. Let me tell you how to fix it. Some institutions and some more old-fashioned people would say that is not coaching. I actually had this conversation with Chad Dickerson, who I happened to bring up a moment ago. And he was like, well, let me tell you, my clients really appreciate the fact that I was the CEO of this thing and that I know what I'm doing. And so I think coaching from a modern standpoint is a combination of actually probably teaching and inquiry, and you have the ability to pull from one or the other.
Is coaching scalable at all?
Like as a, like, can a single person?
Yeah. Way better.
So the answer is they would begin to teach courses. They would begin to do groups. And you'll see a lot of coaches do this. They'll go away from one-on-one and they'll turn it more towards groups and turn it more towards events. And then they actually go back in the direction of what ultimately is a scalable version of this, which is like selling books or like webinars or some other one-to-many thing. And just speaking for me, just speaking as a very limited version of the job that I do doing this, that's not, I don't think that it's as emotionally as satisfying, and it becomes much more marketing oriented than learning oriented. For me, what's compelling about CEO coaching is the relationship that I've developed with founders over a year or 2 years, and knowing that I'm able to support them and I'm able to accelerate not only the growth of their company, but also hopefully to make them feel like I'm in their corner and that they have someone to turn to should some crisis happen.
Yeah, I was interested in the deeper meaning behind your point that no one's ever heard of the former Etsy CEO since, because
they have. I'm exaggerating.
Well, I'm in the sense of, this is where I need to get to the specifics of what I interpreted you as saying. Mm-hmm. This isn't a business where or even a profession, vocation, pick the way you want to describe it, where he's putting money into Instagram ads or is tweeting threads about threads to market, where this is the referrals part. That's right. To your point, which is where the business will get drummed up. So the next question would be, because I really like your idea that this could be something where in 5 years, this is just part of the general structure of how you do things. Mm-hmm. What is the difference between a coach and an angel investor or a VC that you trust or a board member or a co-founder or even just your significant other? Like, how would you bracket it away from those categories?
Yeah. So, I can maybe even speak to all of those, or the ones that I remember. So the difference between the coach and the significant other is that the significant other doesn't have the experience of having run a company. And so even though they really love you, right, they have not had this crisis between you and your co-founder, and they can't advise or ask about how to solve that problem. So that's the difference on the significant other. The difference between you and your co-founder is that the co-founder is in it and sometimes has difficulty being able to see the bigger picture. And sometimes you, as well as your co-founder, have difficulty seeing the bigger picture. So this outside person can help that. The difference between an exec coach and an angel investor is that the angel investor, while being helpful, doesn't come, typically my angel investors, even that I have at practice or that I had at Breather, there was never like, I see you every 2 weeks, come hell or high water, and we're going to work through some stuff. It's just like, hey, can you help me with marketing things on an on again, off again basis? And the difference between, if we continue the thread, the exec coach and the VC, is that the VC has this vested interest in your success. The CEO coach is not, strictly speaking, attached to that. And they don't love you less when you're not succeeding and
treading
love
carefully.
You more when you are. Not that I'm saying that all VCs do this. They certainly do not. And actually, I think most don't. But your CEO coach will not randomly stop. This didn't happen to me, but it's stories that I've heard. Will not randomly stop showing up to board meetings and just send their associate instead or whatever, right?
Do coaches get equity? Like, is there a way that effectively, like, a coach is like an early employee or like a angel investor in of themselves?
It depends on the deal. I don't do this, but some founders and some CEO coaches do this. They either will invest or they will make the sort of advisory shares as a portion of the deal that they do. And so the answer is, I mean, it's not standardized, right? And actually, it's interesting. Like we have these standardized contracts on our website because fundamental tactics like that were actually super helpful to people starting businesses. So it's always making me think like, oh, there should be like a standard deal, almost like a YC safe between a CEO coach and a founder. And maybe there's market for that. I don't know. But the answer is it depends on the person, and it depends on the deal that they want to do.
And the reason why I was asking is obviously certain CEOs, certain founders are going to have different strengths at different parts of the process. But I just see there's a world where an early stage founder who isn't exactly cash rich is going to struggle to get a coach. And the obvious answer to that would be, okay, offer the thing you do have, which is equity. So I was just curious how, so for the next question, as we're nearing the end here, how would you, so two parts of this question then. And I'll just cut this off at A, but A, when do you suggest a founder start looking at a coach, especially given the sense that I think it's possible that a founder would maybe feel not insecure. So this isn't like they're like, oh, like you have a coach, you're just not a real founder. I think that's, once again, something you reference as being more in the past. I mean more, okay, that's pretentious. Like I definitely know if I'm being honest with myself, I definitely know there's a world where I see someone just casually mention, not bragging, but hey, like I have a coach. I'm like, whoa,
look at you,
LeBron over here. With that bias that I don't judge.
But actually, Marshall, I love that you're calling that out, and I think that that speaks to this, and it actually, and not you specifically, but that way of thinking really furthers the feeling that we have about the celebrities out there and the people that succeed, and the fact that they're doing it alone and they're geniuses, which is actually straight up false, right? And so what's really interesting, like the fucking celebrities have stylists, okay? Like they have people, they don't dress themselves. And there's one of the people from Mean Girls, one of the women actresses, there's I'm not a BuzzFeed like big fan, but like there's a mention where she goes, oh yeah, the first time where I dressed myself, where I went on the red carpet, and what she looked like then and what she looked like when she got a stylist, and all of a sudden, of course, she's more beautiful and all these other things.
Man, that's a great listicle. Go right? BuzzFeed. That's a good one.
Yeah, and that's just the stylist, right? But they also have the agent. They also have the press dude that they work with, and so. But we have this superhero perspective in Western culture. And by the way, some people really are superheroes, and Lord knows that they take on a great deal, right? But I think that it furthers this false sense of, oh, these people are single geniuses doing it by themselves. And so I suspect that, and I know in some cases, that if you go into successful founders, even if you go to Steve Jobs, there are literally books that are written about his coach. And you could find it. It's called The $1 Trillion Coach. That's the name of the book, right? And so there are people out there supporting the people in the spotlight. And we just don't know. And when we think about these superheroes, we're like, oh my God, they're so perfect and beautiful and smart and hardworking. To be like, no, they are highly supported by a set of people below them that are simply not in the spotlight, and they want to actually further this idea of I am a superhero, so they don't want to talk about them either, right? That said, I get why you feel that way. And there is a part of me that's also like, oh, you think you're so cool. I guess you think you're big enough and cool enough or like whatever, so you can have a coach. So there is an element of it that does make people feel, oh, this is maybe not right for me because of that.
So as we're okay, so actually the next and final question that I'll ask then is two questions. this is the B part that I forgot. What should founders, this on deck audience, what should they look for in a coach?
So I think the question relies on, is one of two things, or sides to the spectrum. One of them is going to be someone who's more therapy-like and who's going to be like, try to hold it together while your company falls apart, right? That's the more like emotional right brain side. And then there's, on the left-hand side, there's the tactical person. And the tactical person is someone who's going to say, here's how I've run a sales org. I'm going to help you figure out your sales org. And I've been a founder before and I've raised a lot of money. So I'm going to help you figure out how to raise a lot of money. And I will say personally, I'm on the left-hand side more. And it doesn't mean I don't want to hear about your feelings. I end up hearing about their feelings. But I feel that I help people most when I'm able to tactically help progress what they care about. And so you got to figure out which one of those you want. And then you got to aim at that. And then you got to find the closest thing to someone who's going to give you a referral. And by the way, if anyone wants to message me after this, I can't do it, but like I will help you find someone because our network is gigantic. So you should look for that. You should look for a price point. Coaches have crazy price points across various different places. What's been personally shocking to me and very humbling to me is, one, how much people charge sometimes, and also how good someone can be and how little they can charge. I have to tell you, so it's one of the great things that I do in my job is people that are like, yeah, maybe $25 an hour. And I'm just like, yeah, I want to help you out, man. I'm so excited to be able to do that. So it goes up and down the spectrum. You got to figure out what that range is. And then I would suggest you raise a round of venture funding, some round of venture funding if you're in that space. And it's right around that time when you're about to hit your stride of product market fit. Before product market fit, you got to grind a lot. And right as you're hitting it, it's just like, okay, this is about to become a company now. And to me, at my last company, that was when I raised my Series A. And feels like generally the right time, or maybe a little bit before, to do that.
So to wrap on the episode on the practice side, how do you, so like you said, like you're on coaching now, but just what's the vision? Once you're just beyond just like this niche, like what's the product? How do you think about this?
The way that we think about what we do is that if people want to be able to sell, if Shopify is trying to sell items that someone will create, or that items that are shippable, we want to be able to serve anyone who is selling themselves. And so for us, coaching is a great manifestation of that, because it takes so many different different shapes out there in the world, right? From financial coaches to, as I said, like people who teach you specific skill sets, like how to convince a jury of something. And so it takes so many different manifestations out there in the world that coaching is a great way to sort of discuss what that is. So from broader than that, from my perspective, there's a set of people out there who are great at what they do, and they sell it in some various form, in some form or another. And there's a lot of them, and they're growing as the economy kind of splinters and people's income comes from all kinds of different places in a sort of really the wild sort of like new world that we live in, right? And to be able to be a part of someone's journey like that, and to be able to serve them so that they can focus on the work that they want to do, is actually a super humbling, great thing to do. And I guess it's the reason that I want to start another company, going back to sort of full circle to the whole thing, is instead of looking after, what business can I serve, or what enterprise company can I serve? It's really like, what kind of people do I want to be helping, such that 10 years from now, I can be like, wow, I helped a lot of people. I served a lot of people that needed what we were building. And that's what we get up to do every day at Practice. And it's why we really love the work that we do, and the company that we build, and the product that we have.
Julien, this has been really fun, honestly. I'd love for you to just close by shouting out any of your books that would be relevant to the On Deck audience that haven't aged too poorly. Maybe I hope you didn't write like a hustle culture porn one. That one would not have aged well in terms of the narrative. And then two, just Practice's website, and you mentioned a couple of blog posts actually that folks should take a look at.
Yeah. Well, I think that you can find it on our blog. The website of our company is practice.do, D-O. And so you can, on the blog there, you can take a look to get a sense of like what the economics of coaching look like when they work out over a period of about 18 months. And so we've just published almost like an expose on the way that I ran my business and what it turned out to look like economically and how long the customers lasted and where they came from and all those other things. So that's actually just straight up published last week, and you can find that there. The book that is most relevant today and that people continue to read, there's a few of them, but the one that you can go out and find pretty easily is called The Flinch. And that is the book that I think has influenced probably the most founders in our space that we're in. And it's a book about effectively like getting up in the morning and like doing the thing you really want to be doing instead of like putting it off or something. And it's a very short book, and I'm lucky that it still gets read today. And yeah, just in general, I'm out there just tweeting. I'm not on the board of Twitter, but Lord, I act like it sometimes. So,
Well said. Julien, thank you for joining us in the deep end.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.